Good morning, everybody. We'll get started here in just a second. Thanks for dialing in. Just let a few stragglers get online. While we're waiting, just a few notes. Today's presentation is being recorded, so you can view it or share it later. The recording will be available immediately following the presentation this morning. Also, the slides can be downloaded directly from BrightTalk. You look down in the attachment and links section, and you can find the slides there and download them locally. Let's get started. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Rich Karpinski, and I'm the Research Director for 451 Research's Voice of the Enterprise, or VotE IoT survey products, which provide data and insights into how enterprises are deploying the Internet of Things, or IoT. We're going to spend a little bit of time today specifically looking at some new, just published results from our new survey of operations technology, or OT professionals. And we'll compare and contrast those results with what we've been getting back from our survey of IT professionals in the IoT space. As many of you on the line are well aware, IoT represents a fundamental departure from the traditional IT sale. Vendors who can understand both the common priorities and the differences between these two constituency groups, IT and OT, are best positioned, we believe, to take advantage of the biggest IoT opportunities. So my goal today is to provide you with some data-driven insights along with some anecdotal learnings based on our team's interactions with enterprises deploying IoT to help you solve this very challenging enterprise IoT equation. Okay, before we get started, for those of you who are new to 451 Research, we're a mature, multifaceted IT research and advisory company with a focus on covering and helping our clients understand disruptive technologies. We were founded in 2000, and with roughly 250 employees and more than 100 analysts today, we currently serve more than 1,000 clients in the IT sector. We publish a great deal of research and data, over 52 million data points each quarter, and over 4,500 reports each year. This allows us to cover more than 2,000 technology and service providers on an annual basis. Along with our sister company, Uptime Institute, we are headquartered in New York City with offices throughout the globe. Okay, so here's a look at our IoT team. At 451, we've been covering IoT now for quite a while. Obviously, even before we've formalized our coverage. But since we've done that and moved into a distinct IoT channel several years ago, and roughly around the same time launched our VotE IoT survey and other data products, IoT has grown to be one of our most significant research areas. Our coverage of IoT also spans almost every other research team at 451, and we work closely with those research teams in areas including cloud and data center, data analytics, customer experience, security, and other areas to cover IoT from the edge to the cloud and back again. As you can see on this slide, our IoT research team is large and continues to grow, and hopefully you've had a chance to read or interact with some of our IoT analysts. Most of us next week will be out at IoT World. If you're there, we'd be happy to connect. One more thing to note before we move on, if you look closely at this chart, you'll see that each of our analysts, in addition to covering infrastructure and horizontal technologies, also spend a good part of our time delving deep into key verticals. So, for instance, I'm responsible for our smart cities and smart building coverage. Christian Renaud, who's the IoT Channel's Research Director, is responsible for energy and utilities. Ian Hughes, industrial and manufacturing, a key sector that we'll look at very closely today as we share our OT insights. John Spooner covers healthcare, David Immerman, transportation. I mention this because, again, as all of you who work in the area of the Internet of Things know very well, IoT is very vertically driven, and even more to the point, very use case driven within each vertical. We'll spend a lot of time looking at that today, and that's how we've aligned ourselves as a research team. It's also the driver behind our IoT market model, which we won't focus on today, but which along with our VotE OT survey is central to our IoT coverage. The market model is a bottom-up counting of IoT enterprise endpoints across 12 verticals globally. accounting for all of the data those endpoints throws off, their storage, compute, and bandwidth requirements from edge to the cloud. And so as we talk about IoT, these are some of the key assets we have. We have our research team, we have our VotE survey product, we have our IoT market model, and this is how we work with clients to better target their IoT sales and marketing strategies and deliver the right IoT products and services in the markets that are most ready to adopt them. Okay, when looking at the data we'll be sharing today, we always get asked, and I think rightly so, about where the data comes from, right? So for our core VotE surveys, which we deliver quarterly in tech sectors including IoT, data centers, security, infrastructure, and also new in 2018, machine learning and AI, we leverage what we call our 451 Alliance, which is a proprietary group of global IT professionals and technology buying professionals that we at 451 vet and qualify. Our quarterly surveys are based on that large respondent base, typically anywhere between 600 and 800 per survey per quarter respondents, allowing us to provide deep segmented views by crosstab, including by vertical, right, which is probably the number one request we get for a data cut within IoT, but by region, by company size, and increasingly by persona, such as identifying respondents by key categories such as digital leaders, the state at which they are in terms of executing a digital transformation strategy, or things like early tech adopters, companies that self-identify as being aggressive in deployments of new technologies. We'll share some insights around those two groups in particular today because I think it's important when it comes to IoT to understand what phase of the digital transformation lifecycle a customer is in and how ready they are to deploy and take advantage of IoT. For our new OT survey, which we'll be focusing on today, we use the same stringent audience building tactics to bring together a pool of OT professionals, and more on the makeup of those respondents in a minute. Though we'll focus on our OT survey results in this webinar, we'll also do a lot of comparisons with the results from our VotE IoT survey of IT professionals, which, as I mentioned earlier, is now entering its third year, giving us some good historical year-over-year data on IoT deployment trends. For those of you who haven't been exposed to that survey, we publish, again, on a quarterly cadence, tracking key topics and trends in IoT, along with very specific quarterly topics of focus. So, for instance, we just published our VotE IoT budgets and outlooks results, which included current and future budget plans, a bunch of new insights around enterprise ROI on IoT projects, and a look at the technologies and business needs that are driving IoT spending. Coming out of the field this month is our workloads and key projects survey, where we take a close look at where IoT workloads are landing, for instance, from the edge or fog out where the IoT endpoints sit, all the way through to the cloud, where hyperscalers are claiming a strong early share of IoT workloads. Meanwhile, and in addition to that, our organizational dynamics survey looks at how enterprises are organizing themselves to deploy IoT, and our vendor evaluations and report cards take a close look at IoT vendors in use and the attributes that enterprises care about the most. In our last vendor evaluations, for instance, we looked at three sectors: IoT platforms, IoT professional services, and IoT analytics. Which leads us to our new OT survey, which we'll be talking about today. Why do an OT survey? This was strongly in response to requests from our VotE IoT clients, as well as our own recognition of just how important understanding OT is in gaining the full picture of enterprise IoT deployments and plans. The first iteration of the survey, which involved 800 OT respondents, was fielded in this Q1, results published just last month. The second iteration in 2018 of the OT survey will field in Q3, with results published shortly thereafter. On a vertical basis, we are focused very strongly on verticals with an industrial IoT or OT-centric bent, right? So we focus largely on manufacturing, both discrete and process, transportation, oil and gas, utilities, and government, and in particular smart city types of use cases there. We curated and surveyed industry professionals from those verticals that were specifically involved with operational technology, not IT, but true IoT systems such as manufacturing, factory floor, warehouse, inventory, and fleet systems, and the like. We asked about their plans to support very specific vertical IoT use cases, their budgets, hiring and organizational moves to support those deployments, and their thoughts on and plans to deploy IoT technologies and how they work with IoT vendors from both the OT and the IT side. So our very specific goal, and I think this reflects the goals of everyone on the phone and the clients we work with, is to better understand this sweet spot intersection between IT and OT, where we think the real decision-making and work of deploying enterprise IoT takes place. Okay, so with all of that preamble, though I think it was necessary to sort of understand where our data and insights are coming from, with all of that out of the way, let's take a look at today's agenda. I'm going to share data and insights from our OT survey in three key areas. One, where do OT-centric companies and enterprises stand today in deploying IoT, and what are their specific use cases and business outcomes that are driving those deployments? Two, we'll spend some time exploring this idea of the intersection between OT and IT. How do they view IoT, and how do they view each other? Are they working together closely, or are they in conflict, and what does that mean for the vendors and service providers that need to work with them? And three, we'll explore the very specific OT respondent view of IoT technologies and vendors. Who do they prefer to work with as a primary vendor on IoT projects, and what roles do they see for their long-standing OT business and application vendor partners, and what role do they see for IT partners who maybe they haven't dealt with in the past, but they're beginning to talk to when it comes to IoT. And then finally, in closing, we'll share some key takeaways from these data-driven insights. What does it all mean for vendors serving companies like yourselves in these OT-centric industries? How can you equip your sales, marketing, and solutions teams to better understand the needs of OT buyers and take into account their unique needs and requirements as you try to close IoT deals and move those initiatives from trial and proof of concept out to broad-scale deployment? Okay, so first up, an OT-centric view of IT drivers and use cases. Okay, so again, this comes from our OT survey, just released, and we started by trying to get a sense of the state of IoT deployment by OT-centric enterprises. So in this data point displayed here, we asked our OT respondents about their stage of IoT deployment. And so according to our survey, more than half, or 55%, of OT-centric or operationally technology-focused firms have currently deployed IoT, either in proof of concept or at full-scale deployment. Another 24% plan to commence IoT projects within the next 2 years. That means that just 21% of firms in industries driven by traditional operational technology currently have no plans to deploy IoT. Now that's a strong showing, right, and an indication of the value that firms in these industries see in leveraging their IoT endpoint data that has traditionally been used to keep those operational systems up and running, but now can be used in new ways and for new purposes, such as helping manufacturers gain more predictive insights into how those OT systems are functioning and when and how they need repair, or deeper, more real-time insights into fleet tracking and performance, just to name a couple of industrial use cases. Now, when we asked these OT respondents that had successfully deployed IoT what benefits they saw themselves gaining, the top answers that we got back were the top answer was new daily operational efficiencies, which makes sense because improved operations has always been the biggest driver of IoT in our IT survey as well. Beyond that, these OT respondents cited the ability to gain new data analytics capabilities and the ability to improve competitiveness as the second and third top drivers. Again, not surprising that all of these drivers of IoT success in the eyes of the OT respondents we talked to center around improved business outcomes. On the other hand, what causes IoT projects either to stall or to fail to get off the ground in the first place in the eyes of these OT respondents? Somewhat surprisingly, and this differs from what we've heard from our IT stakeholders, the top response in terms of inhibitors to IoT deployments was technology deployment and integration challenges. And this is where we start to get into the OT-IT schism that we'll talk about in more detail later. For OT respondents, the complexity and sheer breadth of technologies and integration points necessary to deliver IoT can be daunting and frankly a bit out of their range of experience when it comes as compared to managing their traditional OT systems, which are often entirely air-gapped or siloed from other IT systems and wide area connectivity, right? After that initial inhibitor, next comes security from our OT respondents. And again, we see that again and again on our IT surveys, security being one of the top IoT concerns and areas of focus and spending. But from the IT side, we don't necessarily see security stalling or grounding projects altogether. It's more viewed as a challenge that can be met. For OT, security is often a challenge that in their eyes, they don't want to risk at all, right? So it's a slightly different view of that very important security challenge, IT to OT. For the OT side, that are running these operational systems that are the very lifeblood of their organizations, and the technology they spend their careers making sure runs without a fault or without downtime, it's often simply too mission critical to risk from a security perspective via an IoT project, and thus is really a major inhibitor. Okay, so let's talk a moment about IoT sectors, verticals, and use cases. If you've followed 451's IoT coverage at all, you may have been exposed to what we call the wheel. We use it to help visualize and organize IoT applications and use cases. So for instance, we start here at the sector level with IoT breaking down into 4 key sectors. Digital consumer, where you have things like digital assistants, wearables, smartwatches, etc. Digital enterprise, a broad category of enterprise-centric IoT use cases. Digital industry, which we are talking about a lot today, manufacturing and their extended supply chain and value chain, for instance. And finally, digital government, a huge sector of the economy driving an array of IoT use cases. And the way we think about it, sitting at the center of it all, you have digital transformation, or the application of digital technologies to intrinsically change for the better, hopefully, how enterprises structure themselves and how they compete in the marketplace. We believe strongly at 451, and I hope all of you can see this promise as well, that IoT, and in particular the new and unique data-driven insights and operational triggers that can be gained by it, is really a key driver of overall enterprise digital transformation. Okay, now at the next level down, and it's beginning to get a little eye charty, I do understand, you have individual industry verticals that make up those top-level sectors. So in the industrial-focused sectors we're focusing on today, you have things like factories, utilities, agriculture, smart buildings, smart industrial transportation, and more. Each industry vertical, especially those with large doses of industrial and operational technology driving the business, have very unique needs and requirements, along with a language all its own, a traditional way of dealing with outside vendors and partners, and unique competitive requirements, including the reality that many of these long-standing companies in some of these sectors may not survive the digital transformation that sits at the center of our wheel. Every vendor and service provider we talk with is focused on just a small handful of key vertical industry targets. I mean, the reality is no vendor can handle them all. This comes into play especially in the OT world. It's very rare that a traditional OT vendor, I can think of probably a few, and you probably can too, that has applications that span a large number of these sectors, right? Most OT vendors instead know their way around a few key verticals extremely well and are probably best viewed even as important players within those industries, just alongside the enterprises they help enable. On the other hand, or by comparison, right, IT is used to selling horizontal technologies into all industries with some level of specific industry customization, but not the level we've seen traditionally in the OT world. So that all changes with IoT. And it doesn't stop there. And again, this is not going to be readable, but I think it helps drive home a critical point, right? Within each sector, within each vertical, there are a multitude of use cases that deliver the real value and the real ROI, the real return on IoT projects. It's at that level that enterprises, and in particular OT-centric enterprises, understand and think about IoT. So if you as a vendor or service provider aren't in the end delivering or playing a very specific and necessary supporting role in delivering a very specific IoT use case and a related business outcome, then you're missing the boat. So what does our OT panel data tell us on this topic of use cases, right? So in our OT survey that's currently out and coming up in the next version of our VotE IoT survey, we took a step beyond asking about high-level use cases and really dug down into the very detailed use cases within each vertical industry, and to get an understanding of what's being deployed today and what's coming in the near future. So here I'm showing OT, so our OT respondent adoption planned in the future of a handful of what we think are the most compelling IoT use cases in that sector, right? So our manufacturing sector OT respondents, not surprisingly, pointed to 1, manufacturing, and 2, inventory monitoring and management as the 2 top IoT use cases in deployment today. That's not surprising because what we call IoT or something like it, right? Manufacturers have been doing for quite some time in terms of leveraging endpoint data to optimize their manufacturing lines and supply chains. This is what we mean when we say that IoT is a new and shiny thing, but elements of it, especially in industries like manufacturing, has been going on for quite some time. Perhaps not as real time or with the kind of historical cloud storage-driven analytics, big data analytics-driven insights that can be gained with IoT, but otherwise has been in play in some of these industries for quite a bit. What's interesting, though, with the responses from our OT panel is what they see coming next, right? So over the next 2 years, the focus begins to shift to OT use cases that would not have been possible with old school supply chain or M2M enabling style technologies, right? So at the top of this list in terms of what's forward-looking and what's coming in the next few years, we see things like predictive or condition-based maintenance or the collecting of endpoint data, storing it nearby for rapid insights, and perhaps in the cloud for historical context, and then using it to anticipate rather than react to a system or machine outage or failure. Leveraging new technologies like AI or machine learning or digital twin with a digital representation of a physical system to think about maintenance in an altogether new way. Also things like intelligent logistics, connected workers, smart robotics. It's those really interesting, purely IoT-driven use cases that begin to come into play more strongly in the near future, all driven by IoT-driven architectures and application design not possible before. And so we now have this very interesting deep dive into very specific IoT use cases here in the view of OT respondents and in our next VotE survey wave in the eyes of IT. I won't share all of the sector and vertical views today, but we've got them now in these other key industries like oil and gas, utility, transportation, and smart cities. And in our next IT survey, we'll add some sort of less OT-centric verticals as well, like retail or healthcare, that have a mix of services and are sort of operationally or somewhat operationally driven, but maybe not as heavy as manufacturing. All of that data, I think, has been very interesting and valuable for us as researchers to ingest. It informs the direction of our research, and also is a big driver of the bottom-up IoT market model that I talked about earlier in terms of very much understanding where the real enterprise IoT intent and plans are headed. So what's the key OT takeaway from this first area of focus, IoT use cases and drivers, right? So as a vendor or service provider working with OT-centric firms and honestly with enterprises of all sorts deploying IoT, the focus must be to drill down from the sector to the vertical to the use case level. And when you get to delivering or enabling the use case, don't stop there. Because ultimately what the enterprise, and particularly the OT professional, wants and needs is not just a technology or infrastructure deployment, but a business outcome. And just as the IT world has been transformed by the move to deliver infrastructure and platforms and software as a service, the OT world, as it moves into IoT, is going to be looking for something very similar, business outcomes as a service. They ultimately are not going to care about the cloud infrastructure or the gateways or even the sensors underlying these solutions. They care about what the technology can do for them. And that is and has always been the OC-centric view of technology. It's never about technology for technology's sake, but the technology to drive very mission-critical business outcomes that are the lifeblood of their organizations, and honestly, the lifeblood of their careers. Right? They live and die with these business outcomes, which is why they are so interested in what IoT can bring them, but they're also cautious about where and how it could potentially fail them. Okay, so up next, let's look at some data around the very specific and unique interactions between IT and OT and how we see them playing out across the IoT planning and deployment cycles, right? So we talk to all of you and hear stories about the disconnects between these two sides, or worse than just disconnects, active conflict. And so how that impacts how all of you deploy and help both of these sides deploy IoT is what we'll take a look at. But what does the data say beyond just mere conjecture and anecdotes, right? And what does it mean for your organizations? Okay, so let's start with budget, the thing that moves IoT from vision and planning to reality. We've now asked both our OT and our IT respondent panels who they see as contributing to IoT budgets. The good news overall, and I'll sneak peek this if not share it with you in the slide, is that IoT budgets, though a relatively small portion of the overall IT budgets, continue to be solid and growing, right? So both IT and OT report that their IoT budgets are growing over the next 12 months. Just a few percentage points of respondents from either side say that their budgets are decreasing, with our IT respondents reporting an average IoT budget growth of about 35% year over year, and OT reporting an even steeper budget growth of almost 50% in terms of planned IoT budget increases. Who is contributing to these IoT projects in terms of budgets? It's interesting, right? So it's definitely a pass the tin cup environment with both IT and OT, with each of those respondents reporting multiple stakeholders contributing to the overall IoT budget, including the IoT team, including the IT team, the OT team, specific lines of business supporting a particular application like sales or marketing or finance or sales or product development, along with digital business units which are often hold early proof of concept responsibility for projects like IoT. Beyond that, who has the deeper pockets or bears the brunt of IoT spending the most? It's interesting. Both IT and OT report back their view that the IT department is the biggest contributor to IoT budgets, with the largest number, 71% of IT respondents saying that IoT spending is most likely to come from their budget. OT is viewed as the second largest contributor, with OT respondents seeing a more equal distribution of budget between OT and IT. And if you think about this, and based on what we talked about earlier, it makes sense, right? So while OT may be more responsible for the outcomes and dependent on the successful ROI of IoT projects, and thus a key decision maker and influencer in the entire project, right? Getting it off the ground and getting it moving, many of the infrastructure purchases required to support IoT, especially at scale, right, are likely to come from IT. So the massive amounts of storage, servers, bandwidth, and the overall operational costs of the IT infrastructure to keep an IoT application running. Even when opting for a cloud-based or as-a-service IoT solution, IT is better positioned and more likely to be positioned to spec and ultimately operate or oversee the underlying systems of an IoT application and thus feel the budget hit most starkly. Okay, so more interesting though than just looking at budgets, I think, is to get some sentiment, right? So how do IT and OT feel about working together on IoT? Both what they respect and or expect or require from each other, and what they see and feel in the real world. So we asked specifically we asked this of both our IT and OT respondents in separate surveys, how they view collaboration, the state of collaboration between the two sides. And the results, I think, were really interesting. And I think hold even more insights as you dig down into it than they do at first glance. Because at first view, our respondents reported that they did not report a tremendous amount of conflict over IoT, right? So for IT respondents, just 3% viewed themselves as being in, quote, active conflict with their OT peers over IoT, and just 7% of IT respondents consider themselves fully siloed from OT and thus limited in their interactions over IoT. Interestingly, the IoT view is a little more stark, right? With 12% of OT respondents, still a small number, but 4 times more than IT, right? So significantly more than IT, citing active conflict with the other side of the house. So OT citing active conflict with IT over their IoT initiatives. Now that's obviously a significant delta, right? Where there is active conflict within organizations over IoT plans and strategies, OT, whose systems are being touched likely for the first time by those outside the shop floor and their departments, and who ultimately bear the responsibility for the business outcomes, good or bad, they're more likely to feel and express conflict with their peers over IoT. Now, vendors serving such enterprises need to be very aware of that dynamic, because it really bears on getting those projects funded and getting them moved into full deployment. Now, looking at the top end of that top chart, so the first 2 bars in that top chart, again, things appear rosier at first glance than maybe we'd expect, but maybe not so much at a deeper look. So both IT and OT are most likely to report that they work together on IoT on an as-needed basis, which of course I think makes sense. Most of these projects won't work at all with some level of collaboration between the two sides. However, just 44% of our IT respondents and an even smaller number, only 34% of our OT respondents, report that in their organizations, OT and IT are working closely together on IoT from, quote, conception to ongoing operations, so soup to nuts, right? I think that should especially be a cause for concern. In OT's view, in particular, almost 2/3 of IoT projects get off the ground and start running without OT and IT being at the same table and on the same page from the very start of the project. Now, that's a recipe for trouble, something that the vendors we talk to have been reporting back to us as a reality, and it's a clear harbinger of potential down-the-line IoT project trouble. Thinking about it in another way, and represented in the chart on the lower half of the screen, is that close OT-IT collaboration is clearly a best practice for IoT success. So, for instance, among the respondents in our OT survey who are working at companies that we'd call digital leaders, so companies that are self-identifying as being far down the execution path toward digital transformation, 44% of those digital leaders cite close OT-IT collaboration on their IoT projects. They also, and we've seen this elsewhere, they report much higher ROI. At companies that are not yet undertaking a digital transformation initiative, just 25% cite close IT-OT collaboration, and not surprisingly, are also much more challenged not only to have a positive ROI for IoT, but even to understand or be tracking that ROI, right? So clearly, this view and understanding this view of how these two worlds work together is crucial, right? So if we want to, from a takeaway perspective, right, what does all this mean? I think first, the numbers that we have here, and it's always great to have some data, that they do back up what everyone is feeling, especially if we take a close look at the responses, right? OT and IT are generally not in sync on IoT strategies and priorities and implementation. They'll work together when they have to, but far too few companies are putting these two key stakeholders side by side at the table from the get-go. We're seeing some indication from our data, not shared here, but part of the questions we ask, We're seeing some momentum toward companies moving toward a role that sort of syncs OT and IT, blends IT and OT functions together, right? And that's an interesting trend, but also probably a long-term one. In the meantime, and we can assume these two key stakeholders, IT and OT, are coming to the table from different parts of the organization, different parts of the building, with likely little to no collaboration in their past, and a sort of a jaundiced view of toward that need for close collaboration in the future. So what does that mean for vendors like yourselves who are serving these two very distinct constituencies in terms of IoT? For starters, make sure you aren't walking into a house on fire or a house of cards ready to come tumbling down as you move from the glow of proof of concept into the reality of a general and wide-scale deployment of IoT. At the same time, organizations, we find that are deploying IoT are putting a good measure of faith and control into the hands of their key partners and vendors in IoT initiatives, especially those they consider the lead or primary vendor. So if you're in that role, you really need to step to the table and help solve this problem. If you're used to talking to the IT side, you need to realize there's a world of stakeholders beyond the IT department when it comes to IoT. Bring them to the table early to ensure success. And if you're an OT vendor, right, be prepared to talk IT. Work with your OT colleagues, the folks you've been serving probably for years and decades, and help them understand the issues and concerns and costs associated with IT technologies from cloud to the edge, and that are required to deliver this full solution. Okay, and finally, let's look at what the data says about how IT views IoT vendors and technologies. For many of you on this call, this is a critically important section, right? You haven't sold to or worked with OT in the past, so what do they think of you as a vendor, and what do they most need from you as they deploy IoT? Okay, so our first data point here looks at the question, what type of vendor does your organization view as its primary IoT vendor? So they can pick only one, primary vendor. It's a question we've asked in our IT service for a while, or our IT survey for a while, and that we asked in our first OT survey. And not surprisingly, we got very distinct answers. The top response for lead IoT vendors from IT respondents was cloud provider. And when we've done individual vendor evaluations with this IT respondent audience, we get similar responses with specific vendors led by AWS and Google and Microsoft leading the way. Cloud providers have positioned, as we all know, and marketed their IoT platforms very strongly in the past 12 to 18 months. They're relatively easy to get initial projects up and running on. And elsewhere at 451, we tracked the strong gains made by cloud hyperscalers with other workloads. It looks like IoT is moving along that same track with IT. For our OT respondents, right, so for our operationally technology-focused respondents, they report that they're most likely to work with a systems integrator, followed closely by their business or OT application provider. Again, this makes sense. All of the major OT firms, from GE and Siemens and Bosch and PTC and others, they've all come to market with IoT platforms that extend and IoT enable their core business applications. And SIs, or system integrators, we've seen again and again, are absolutely critical in the OT world and in the IoT world, with very specialized, SIs have very specialized knowledge of the specific vertical use cases driving current business processes, as well as the new IoT use cases that are driving new business outcomes. So OT vendors are, in this environment, are hotly on the lookout for VAR and ISV partners that can help them land and deliver IoT deals. And the SIs that work in this sector, and not just the large ones like an Accenture or Deloitte, but we're finding specialized industry SIs, those in maybe the $50 to $100 million annual revenue range. Those kinds of SIs and deployment partners are in many ways the unicorns of the OT IoT world, right? They're in high demand and extremely well positioned to grow their businesses by helping not just end user companies, but also larger OT and IT vendors to win and deliver IoT deals. Okay, so beyond primary vendor status, what do our OT respondents look for in IoT vendors? And here I'll point to the chart on the right. Again, not terribly surprising, but it's good to have some hard data to back up what we all have a gut feeling about. This is asking our OT respondent base, right? So according to our data and questions to them, OT wants very specific things from their OT vendor partners. They want OT application-specific functionality. They want their help in making sure their operational systems, which have traditionally been extremely secure, remain secure. And they want solution and process consulting, 1, 2, 3, right? What do they want from their IT vendors, right? So IT vendors that maybe on the OT side they haven't dealt with as closely, or if they've dealt with, it's been a slightly at arm's length, right? So what are they looking for from those vendors as they deploy IoT? Above all, they're seeking help in making sure their end-to-end IoT application is secure, right? We talked about this a couple times already. They have a strong sense that IT vendors, both security-specific vendors and broad infrastructure vendors, can help them on the security front. They also want and need cloud infrastructure, and that's particularly interesting because although the first generation of IoT platforms that came directly from OT vendors were typically delivered via their own cloud infrastructure, we're seeing a clear trend toward OT vendors, their OT vendor IoT platforms needing and wanting to be spun up as applications accessible from the main cloud hyperscalers, delivered as a platform or software as a service, right? So in both cases, our OT panel is looking to their respective OT and IT vendors to deliver what they do best, which means that vendors in each sector shouldn't try to do it all, but rather pursue strong partnership strategies that put together a team or multiple teams, depending on a sort of per vertical basis, to deliver everything an enterprise needs. Okay, and then finally, from the data perspective, a look at the technology lifecycle from the OT perspective of key IoT enabling technologies. So here we see a clear breakdown between some different classes of IoT enablers. The question at the base of this chart is which technologies, you can pick all that apply, do you consider critical to your IoT initiatives? And clearly there's some mainstream IT-centric infrastructure that most enterprises, including OT respondents, consider absolutely critical for the IoT success. So at the top of this chart, again, you get security across application, endpoint, data flows, et cetera. Followed by cloud infrastructure for storage and delivering IoT compute and analytics functions, followed by big data analytics to crunch all of the endpoint data being gathered and to gain business outcome insights, right? The next group, so that's followed by the next wave of what we might call IoT enablers, not just analytics, traditional analytics, but AI and machine learning algorithms to gain new insights faster and better, right? Edge computing to ensure that the workloads required to support all of those very specific use cases we talked about is being handled and sent not just out to the cloud, but where necessary being handled at the edge and near edge to deliver the control and latency needed to support, for instance, real-time manufacturing applications, or obviously even more critical time-sensitive use cases like autonomous driving, right? And then finally, low-power, wide-area connectivity to continue to move IoT connectivity from power-consuming and relatively expensive 2G, 3G LTE to more efficient narrowband and ultimately 5G type connectivity. And then finally, you've got a class of what we call maybe still emerging or specialty IoT technologies. And it's interesting to talk to the OT respondent base about these, because these are things that might not have wide applicability, but absolutely are critical applications within certain OT-centric industries, right? And so if you go to an OT show, an OT event, right, and you're looking at some of those vendors you're down on the show floor, you're going to see a tremendous amount of digital twin types of screens, right, for enabling data-driven machine monitoring. You're going to hear some talk in the IT world at that leading edge around blockchain to meet certain IoT-specific security needs, and you're going to see talk, and it's real, but maybe not near-term for all verticals, about AR and VR really being the user interface for many, many IoT applications. So again, it's important to understand the way that OT thinks about and looks at IoT enabling vendors and technologies. The big takeaways here, again, and most of you are probably feeling this in the market, IoT projects are sort of multi-vendor on steroids, right? Every project requires a small army of vendors and deployment partners spanning the OT and IT worlds. As a provider in this environment, it's absolutely crucial to, number one, define your differentiated capability and role, two, stick to it, and three, align yourself with the best partners to both bid and win deals, as well as to help deploy these projects successfully. In the end, IoT is about ecosystems. Large vendors will try to swallow as many of the piece parts of that ecosystem as possible. They just will. It's the path to growth for a large company, a large vendor. But even the largest vendors can't do it all in IoT. It's just impossible. So playing well with others is imperative and will put you in good standing with the enterprises you are ultimately working with and trying to help enable IoT. So as we wind down here, let's boil down a few of our key takeaways, right? So based on our data and our survey of OT respondents and comparing and contrasting with IT, right, it's clear that IT and OT remain distinct realms today. Among more digital savvy organizations, the collaboration will be tighter, but elsewhere, vendors can and must make this closer collaboration happen to help ensure IoT success. IoT budgets and deals are fed by many stakeholders, so be ready to pass the tin cup and cobble together budget and internal project support to get initiatives off the ground, and also vitally move initiatives from that proof of concept stage into really mission critical wide-scale deployment. Finally, OT-IT conflict does exist. No one's imagining it, right? And at companies where it isn't out in the open, it possibly could be even worse because the two sides sort of don't know each other and don't realize what they don't know, right? In terms of these two worlds working together and how that has to happen. So again, as a vendor trying to win deals and deliver projects, it's absolutely critical to train up your sales, marketing, and solutions engineering to understand and talk to both of these worlds, right? You don't need to deliver everything that IT and OT has traditionally and will continue to deliver somewhat separately and uniquely, right? But you do need to understand the unique needs and requirements and work well within an IoT partner ecosystem that is equal parts OT and IT. We're coming to the end here. Before we pause for a few questions, I want to just close with how 451 can help you in this area with our data and analyst insights, especially in this sweet spot area of OT and IT that we discussed today, right? So a lot of this was based on our VOTE Voice of the Enterprise surveys, IoT surveys, both the IT and OT deliverables, right? So just a quick look at what you get as a subscriber to this project, right? So for each survey, both the VotE IoT IT survey, which is delivered quarterly, and the VotE IoT OT survey, which is delivered twice in 2018. You get an Excel sheet with the answers to all the survey questions, many of which we talked about today, including pre-built crosstabs for all the segmentation. So you can quickly get a view of responses by vertical, by company size, and by persona, as we shared some today, right? You get a set of PowerPoint charts and figures for all those questions, and both those raw Excel and PowerPoint charts or files are great if you have teams that are ready to ingest and make use of sort of the raw data, right? Beyond that, you get an analyst advisor report in PowerPoint/PDF format with a lot of the types of charts and insights and sort of cross-analysis, cross-IT, OT analysis that we shared today, only going quite a bit deeper and covering many more areas. And this is where you get the key takeaways and insights to help drive strategy and market positioning. You get all of this in terms of access on an enterprise-wide basis. You get access to our team of analysts, which I shared earlier, for inquiry against the data and our insights on some of the vertical trends in particular, and the ability to reuse and reprint the charts and data internally and externally. On the VotE IT side, IoT IT survey side, we also do a handful, say 12 to 15 in-depth interviews per quarter so you get some of that anecdotal insight from enterprises deploying IoT as well, right? So I shared a lot of data today, but I want to emphasize it's really only the tip of the iceberg of what we're finding and gaining with our OT survey. In addition to what I shared today, you get data and insights into the additional key verticals we talked about, both near and future use case deployments. A bunch of additional insights into success drivers and inhibitors across those key cases, use cases, and verticals, including a ton of new data on IoT ROI in particular that I think is pretty unique and valuable. I just gave a little taste of it today. A deeper look into OT's view on deployment drivers and budget priorities, and a lot more on this OT-IT collaboration conflict sweet spot, right? And so all of this on a steady, regular cadence, 4x for IT and 2x in 2018 for OT. And as I said earlier, this is really driving a lot of our, we're really leveraging this data internally as an analyst team to drive and position a lot of our research. So we'll end here, right? And as a final takeaway, just leave some thoughts about how we at 451 as an analyst team like to work with our IoT vendor and service provider clients. We think IoT requires a unique style of engagement, right, from the traditional IT analyst engagement, driven by the market needs and the conversations we've had with all of you. So we really aim to sit down, understand the verticals and use cases you're targeting. We apply our survey and market data assets, a lot of which we share today, and our specific analyst vertical expertise against those opportunity areas, right? We like to talk opportunity definition and strategy, as well as go-to-market assets and requirements for positioning your solutions, right? And talk about it in a very specific vertical and use case way, right? Not focusing on whether there's 1 trillion endpoints or $1 billion revenue in particular markets for IoT, right? And then in particular, in 2018, we're focusing on this very unique data-driven view of how this enterprise IoT equation of OT and IT works and how you can make it work for you. So with that, Cassie is helping me out on the line. We'll pause and take a few questions. And just to remind everybody, this presentation has been recorded. It will be available immediately after we hang up here, and the slides from today are also available in the Bright Talk interface. So thanks everybody for their time today.
And thank you, Rich, for presenting today. Hi, everybody. As Rich mentioned, my name is Cassie Rowe. I work on the marketing team here at 451 Research, and I'm going to help out a little bit with the Q&A today. Unfortunately, we only have time for one question. So looking at your questions, let's have Rich answer where the C-suite executives can play a role and fit into decision-making and driving these IoT initiatives as the IT and IoT merger is, or convergence is inevitable.
Yep, thanks, Cassie. It's a great question because the C-suite is another distinct stakeholder. That's actually a very insightful question. They're going to have a lot of strategic input for a lot of IoT projects. As we talked about, IoT projects tend to be central to digital transformation efforts in many ways. You're going to get some projects that are not, right? You're going to get an environmental sensor put up someplace or something that's just triggering and enabling a very simple interaction, right? But a lot of these IoT projects are going to be very strategic. So the C-suite's going to be extremely involved and need to be talked to often. At a large company, if they're looking to deploy IoT as that digital transformation enabler, right? So that may be the entry point on some of those projects. That digital business unit might also have a CTO or someone in that kind of a capacity, a digital business leader that's reporting directly into the C-suite. So that might be another entry point into that decision-making apparatus, right? The other thing we've noticed about, and we've seen this in our data, is the C-suite tends to have a very different view of the realities of an IoT deployment, both in terms of requirements and success levels, versus like an IT staff that's deployed down at the deployment level, right? So the C-suite tends to believe they have more in-house capabilities than the IT department that's deploying typically knows is the reality. They tend to have a more glowing view of ROI. So, it's great to talk to the C-suite about what's possible, but a real recipe for success is sort of, following along with that glowing view that often the C-suite sees of something new and shiny, and sort of selling to that, marketing to that, when in reality it's a very complex type of solution and application to deploy and gain value from, right? So maybe even serving, again, as a go-between between the C-suite and the deployment teams, and bringing a realistic view to both is going to be really important to ensure real-world success, and again, taking projects out to that large-scale deployment level where everybody gets value and vendors see real dollars.
Excellent. Thank you, Rich.
Yep.
As I said, we only did have time for one question. So I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar today. And thank you, Rich, for your time and presenting this webinar. And we hope to all see you next time.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.